Dr. Sen, there's been 10 years of having an economist, technocrat Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, which just ended on the 16th of May, and we have another government led by Mr. Narendra Modi in office. You have known Dr. Manmohan Singh, your intellectual journeys have sort of been quite, you've watched each other closely, etc. What actually went wrong for somebody who was, this almost this, not just middle class, but this ideal, this honest person who didn't have the other kind of baggage that Indian politicians are meant to be having, etc. And he did bat for 10 years on. What tripped him up?
Well, I think there are several things to say. Let me begin. I mean, I'll make 3 points, but I'll make point 0 first. Namely, I agree with you that he is a very old friend of mine, and I knew him when he was an undergraduate. I was also a student in Cambridge. I liked him a lot, and I still do. I think he is a very wonderful human being. The point one is that when you look at the record, the interesting thing isn't so much that nothing was achieved, but what was achieved could not be somehow sold in any way. Polio disappeared, AIDS appeared as a scourge. It was tamed in India. India learned how to deal with storms of a kind that New Orleans couldn't, and India could do it with hardly any casualty. India also has the second highest growth rate in that period. It still is one of the record numbers of growth in the history. So the first question, this is my first point, is what made it so difficult for the party to claim credit for what they had actually done? Something went wrong. And it's a deep question for me, because if there was the failure, the first failure, it seems to me, is in the failure of articulation. I think if there is if there's an analysis of what happened, I think it should not begin with saying what went wrong, but why is it that what went right got so little airing? Secondly, yes, there are quite a few things did go wrong, particularly in the second period. I think if Manmohan had stepped down after the first period, he would be regarded as an enormously successful prime minister, even within all the limitations that I was mentioning, including that of articulation. But I think the second period didn't go well, and it was in many ways a coalition government. I'm not even sure how united the party itself was. In fact, the culture of not doing anything without getting compensated, which is a big problem in many countries in the world, became increasingly gripping factor in the governance. And I think there were many problems that kept up. Whether Manmohan, in the position that he was occupying then, head of the coalition government, and not the most powerful voice in the party, whether he could have dealt with it remains to be seen. When I was undergraduate, I wouldn't have thought that Manmohan would go to it. I would expect him to be a great economist, which he is, to the extent that he has had time to do it, because he had so much of his time absorbed by other things, like running the planning commission and then running the government and running India. But because he's not a natural. He doesn't have the kind. You need a kind of sharpness, nastiness. And I mean nastiness in a very good sense. That you have to be nasty to some people and come down like a ton of bricks. I don't see, if you gave a ton of bricks to Manmohan, I don't think he can push it on anyone
What would he do with it?
Yeah, he would try to make sure that it doesn't fall on anyone, and that may defeat the purpose for which the ton of bricks was given to him. So I think there is that. I think the third thing was that generally, and that's not just a governmental failure, because I think what happened to India, and I think we're still living in it to some extent, is a failure of the state and the governance. That includes the opposition parties. It was very difficult to get things through the parliament. Now, for many years, the parliament could be shut down for quite some time. Now, people are very upset at this moment because we shut down one day for a few hours. But when that happens, it's very difficult, to get things done, actually. And I think ultimately then you look for those things which you can get through the parliament rather than those things which you would ideally like to do if you are running the country. One has to be careful that one doesn't construct from it an anti-democratic scenario. I think it's a question of the practice of democracy that went wrong. And I think if there was, I was critical of Mr. Modi, if people know that, and I even voted, Santiniketan voted it. I had was given this mark, and one morning I got up and I saw in many newspapers myself making an obscene gesture in the front page everywhere, demonstrating that. So I wasn't Mr. Modi's supporter. But I have to say there's one thing that Mr. Modi did do, a sense of giving people a faith that things can happen. It may not have been exactly the things that I would have liked to have happened, but it was very important to move from a culture that, look, nothing can happen really here. This is India. And I think that's an achievement, and that I do mean as a compliment. Despite, that would not make my differences on, say, secularism and other issues go away between Mr. Modi and myself, the Prime Minister and myself. On the other hand, I think that if we don't recognize that, we are missing out something very important politically. In some ways, Manmohan is, because of the circumstances, I personally think, and I may be biased as a friend, was not able quite to give that impression that things can actually happen. And there was a reason, because things couldn't happen.